The eviction notice trembled in James Thompson's wrinkled hands as the last note of the Moonlight Sonata faded into the air. 72 years of life, 40 of which were dedicated to teaching piano in that same studio, and now everything could end with a simple corporate signature. Beyond the fogged-up window, the city lights grew like golden shadows, swallowing the neighborhood that was once the beating heart of local music. "Mr. Thompson?" Lucy's small voice, his youngest student, brought him back to reality. "Why are you crying?" James hadn't noticed the tears marking his face. Quickly storing the envelope in the drawer, he forced a smile, the same one he had worn since Eleanor left, taking with her not just his love but also the secrets of his most beautiful compositions. "Sometimes music touches us so deeply that it overflows through our eyes, dear," he replied, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. Lucy, with her 9 years and a natural talent that painfully reminded him of Eleanor, nodded with the unique wisdom of children. The studio, with its century-old piano and walls lined with memories, was more than just a teaching space. It was a sanctuary where children from working-class families could touch the magic of music without worrying about the burden of tuition fees. It was Eleanor's legacy, his beloved wife, who believed that music should be a gift for everyone, not a privilege for the fortunate. The phone rang, cutting through the silence like a dissonant note. The unknown number glowed on the screen with a disturbing urgency. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice on the other end was metallic, calculated. "Richard Palmer, from Harrison Music Corporation. Mr. William Harrison has a proposal for you." The words that followed made James' heart stop for a moment. A performance at the corporation's annual gala ball, the most prestigious event in the social circle. The fee would be more than enough to save the studio, but the condition made his blood run cold. He had to play a specific composition by Harrison. "The sheet music will arrive tomorrow," Palmer continued. "Mr. Harrison insists that it be this particular piece." As Lucy put away her sheet music, unaware of the storm brewing, James watched the city through the window. The sun set behind the skyscrapers, painting the sky with shades of red that reminded him of the final pages of Eleanor's composition diary, the one that mysteriously disappeared after her death. "Will we continue our lesson tomorrow, Mr. Thompson?" Lucy asked, her voice full of hope. "Of course, dear," he replied automatically, even though he knew tomorrow held more questions than answers. Eleanor's last words before she left echoed in his mind. "There are truths, James, that only music can reveal." Now, alone in the studio that held so many memories, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover exactly what she meant. The price of that discovery, however, might be more than he was prepared to pay. The morning brought more than just the promised sheet music. The messenger from Harrison Music Corporation delivered a heavy envelope, sealed with the company's golden emblem. James's hands trembled as he recognized the first notes on the aged paper. His heart, already heavy with memories, seemed to sink further into his chest. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, his fingers tracing the notes with the familiarity of someone who recognizes the handwriting of a loved one. It was the Twilight Symphony, the last composition Eleanor had worked on before her sudden death 5 years ago. The same one she had sworn was her masterpiece but never got to publish. The studio felt quieter than ever as James sat at the piano. His hands, guided by muscle memory, began to play the opening bars. Each note was like a whisper from Eleanor, an echo of nights when she would sit at that same bench, composing until dawn. The music flowed just as he remembered, the same crescendos, the same delicate pauses she loved so much. But something was wrong. In the upper right corner of the sheet, where Eleanor Thompson's name should have been, was printed in elegant letters, "Original composition by William Harrison." The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. It was Margaret, the building's caretaker for over 2 decades, carrying a dusty box. "I found this while cleaning the basement," she said, her eyes revealing concern. "I thought you should see it." Inside the box, James found old letters, all addressed to Eleanor, all bearing the Harrison Music Corporation's letterhead. They dated back 6 years, months before her death. With a racing heart, he began to read. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, your latest composition is extraordinary, as always. However, I must remind you of our agreement. As long as you maintain your position as an anonymous consultant, we will ensure that your husband never loses the studio. Otherwise..." James let the letter fall, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Other letters revealed more. Eleanor had been forced to sell her compositions to Harrison, who published them as his own works. The studio, always on the brink of eviction, was kept afloat thanks to this grim agreement. "She did this for me," James whispered, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. "For us, for the children." The phone rang again. It was Palmer, his voice colder than before. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Harrison would like to confirm your participation in the ball. The performance will be broadcast live to the entire musical community. It will be historic." Between Palmer's lines, James sensed a veiled threat. Harrison wasn't just asking for a performance, he was orchestrating something bigger. The ball would be his chance to publicly solidify his claim over Eleanor's works. That night, while the city slept, James stayed awake, rereading the letters over and over. Beside him, a photo of Eleanor smiled from the frame, her gentle eyes hiding the weight of the secret she had carried to the end. In the silence of the studio, he made a decision. Eleanor's music would not remain in the shadows. But the price of the truth could cost more than just the studio. It could destroy the entire legacy his beloved wife had sacrificed so much to protect. Morning arrived with the familiar sound of small footsteps climbing the stairs to the studio. Lucy was early for her lesson as always, carrying not only her sheet music but also a small bouquet of daisies picked from the community garden. "To brighten the studio, Mr. Thompson," she said, placing the flowers in an improvised vase. James watched the girl settle at the piano, her enthusiasm so reminiscent of Eleanor that it hurt. The letters discovered the night before weighed on his conscience like keys pressed in a minor chord. Each note Lucy played seemed to echo the question that had kept him awake: how to protect Eleanor's legacy without destroying the dream she had sacrificed so much to preserve. "Mr. Thompson?" Lucy interrupted his thoughts. "You seem different today." "Just memories, dear," he replied, trying to smile. "You know, your dedication reminds me of someone very special." Sitting beside Lucy on the piano bench, James began to talk about Eleanor for the first time in years. He spoke of how she transformed notes into stories, how her natural talent flowed through her compositions like clear water. Lucy listened attentively, her eyes shining with each word. "She believed music belongs to everyone," James explained, his hands gently caressing the keys. "This studio was her dream, a place where any child could learn, regardless of how much money their parents had." As Lucy practiced, Margaret appeared again at the studio door, this time with an even more concerned expression. "James, there's something you need to see." In her hands, an old newspaper bore a headline that made his heart tighten. "Harrison Music Corporation announces expansion, acquisition of historic properties planned for next year." The date of the newspaper, a week before Eleanor's death. "She knew," James murmured, the pieces of the puzzle painfully falling into place. "Eleanor discovered Harrison's plans to demolish the entire block." Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. "I found this along with the letters." She was fighting not just for the studio, James, but for the entire community. At that moment the phone rang once more. It was a former student of Eleanor, now a respected pianist. "Mr. Thompson, I need to tell you something. I was at a meeting at Harrison Music Corporation yesterday. They're planning to use your performance at the ball as public proof of the authorship of the compositions. William Harrison will announce a complete book with his works, including unpublished scores by Eleanor." The weight of this revelation made James stagger. Eleanor hadn't just sold her compositions. She had waged a silent battle against an empire that threatened not only her music but the entire neighborhood she loved so much. Watching Lucy at the piano, completely absorbed in her practice, James felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. Eleanor had protected this dream with her silence, but now it was his turn to protect it with the truth. The question was no longer whether he should expose Harrison but how to do it without destroying the legacy of hope Eleanor had built with such sacrifice. "Mr. Thompson," Lucy called, finishing her piece, "can I learn that music Mrs. Eleanor composed? The one you were playing yesterday?" James looked at the Twilight Symphony sheet music on the piano, Eleanor's handwritten notes still visible beneath Harrison's printed name. "Yes, Lucy," he replied, renewed determination in his voice. "It's time for everyone to know Eleanor's true music." During the week leading up to the ball, the studio gained a different energy. The afternoons were filled not only with regular lessons but with a greater purpose that made James's heart beat stronger every day. As his fingers danced over the keys, rehearsing the Twilight Symphony, each note seemed to carry the weight of a long silenced truth. Lucy, always the first to arrive and the last to leave, became a constant presence during the rehearsals. Sitting quietly in a corner of the studio, she watched James with attentive eyes, absorbing every nuance of the melody Eleanor had created. In one of those moments, she made an observation that struck James like a bolt of clarity. "You know, Mr. Thompson, when you play that music, it feels like you're talking to someone," she said, toying with one of the daisies already wilting. "Wilted in the vase. It's different from all the other music. It's like the music is telling a story that needs to be heard." The girl's words resonated deeply within James. Eleanor always said that every composition carried a piece of its creator's soul. Now, playing those notes he knew so intimately, he could feel her presence in every measure, every pause, every crescendo. Margaret began bringing coffee every afternoon, concerned about the long hours James dedicated to rehearsing. One afternoon, she brought something even more significant. An old diary of Eleanor's, found between the pages of a sheet music book in the basement. "I found this morning," she said, handing the worn notebook to James. Maybe you need to read it?" That night, after Lucy left and the studio fell silent again, James opened the diary. The yellowed pages revealed not just Eleanor's thoughts but her internal struggle during those final months. Amid musical notes and composition sketches, there were confessions that broke his heart. "How can I allow them to destroy not only my music but the dreams of so many children? This studio is more than walls and a piano. It's a haven where music can transform lives. William Harrison may have my name on the sheet music, but he will never have the essence of what these melodies mean." And called again, this time with even more disturbing news. "Mr. Thompson, I found out that Harrison plans to use the ball to announce the demolition of the entire block. He wants to turn everything into a luxury commercial complex. The studio will be the first to fall." The revelation hit James like a dissonant chord. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about preserving a legacy of hope that Eleanor had protected with her own life. The children who filled the studio with their hesitant melodies, the proud smiles of parents who could never afford private lessons, the dreams that blossomed within those old walls, everything was at risk. That night, sitting at the piano where Eleanor had spent so many hours composing, James began subtly modifying sections of the Twilight Symphony. They weren't major changes, just small adjustments that transformed the piece into something even more personal, more true. With each alteration, he could feel Eleanor guiding his hands as if they were, at last, completing her final composition together. "You always said music has the power to reveal truths, my love," he whispered to Eleanor's portrait. "At the ball, your truth will finally be heard." On the eve of the ball, the twilight painted the studio in golden tones when Lucy arrived for her last lesson of the week. In her arms, she carried something different from the usual sheet music, a carefully folded blue dress. "Mom and I sewed it together," she explained, her eyes shining with pride. "For you to wear tomorrow night." It was a navy blue bow tie, made from scraps of her mother's old work dress, a waitress who had always dreamed of seeing her daughter play the piano. James held the bow tie with trembling hands, touched by the simple gesture that carried so much meaning. "Lucy?" His voice faltered, choked with emotion. The girl smiled, understanding without words what that moment meant. "You're going to play Mrs. Eleanor's music tomorrow, aren't you?" she asked, sitting at the piano. "The one that tells a special story?" Before James could answer, the studio door opened, and entered, carrying an old folder. Her face was pale, marked by the urgency of her discovery. "James, I found something in the record company's archives," she said, spreading documents over the piano. Eleanor wasn't alone in her fight. There were other composers, other silenced stories. Harrison built his empire on stolen music, appropriated dreams. Among the papers, a yellowed photo caught James's attention. It showed Eleanor, much younger, alongside a group of musicians in front of the studio. On the back, a message written in her delicate handwriting: "Music is our voice. Even in silence, it tells our truth." Margaret appeared at the door, her eyes revealing that she had heard everything. "The neighborhood kids organized something," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They want to show you." In the small community garden in front of the studio, dozens of children, former and current students of James, gathered with their instruments. Lucy ran to join them, taking her place at the small portable keyboard. Under the setting sun they began to play. It was a simple, moving version of the Twilight Symphony. Each note, even if not always perfect, carried the love and gratitude of a community that had found its voice through music. James watched, silent tears streaming down his face, as the notes Eleanor had composed came to life through those little hands. In the middle of the performance, parents began to arrive, drawn by the melody echoing through the narrow streets of the neighborhood. "Eleanor would be so proud," whispered Margaret, holding James's hand. "Tomorrow isn't just about exposing Harrison. It's about showing the world that true music cannot be bought or sold. It lives in the hearts it touches." That night, after everyone had left, James sat at the piano one last time. Wearing the blue bow tie, he rehearsed not only the notes but also the words he would say. Each key pressed was a promise, for Eleanor, for Lucy, for all the children who had found hope within those old walls. "Tomorrow, my love," he spoke to Eleanor's portrait, "your music will finally tell our story. And this time the whole world will listen." The ballroom sparkled with crystals and empty promises. James adjusted his blue bow tie, feeling the weight of the patches sewn with love by Lucy and her mother. In the mirror of the makeshift dressing room, he saw not only his reflection but also fragments of all the lives Eleanor had touched through her music. William Harrison circulated among the guests like a king in his court, his smile as polished as it was false. He held a champagne glass in one hand and in the other, a luxuriously bound book, the collection of his compositions ready to be revealed to the world. "Mr. Thompson," Harrison's voice sounded sugary as he approached. "What an honor to have you with us tonight. You know, your wife always had great admiration for my work. She would be proud to see you play my composition." James felt the bitter taste of the lie but remained calm. In the pocket of his jacket, he carried a page from Eleanor's diary. "Truth, like music, finds its own way to be heard." The moment of the performance arrived like an inevitable wave. The elite audience settled into their golden chairs, glasses gently clinking. But in the last rows, familiar faces stood out. Margaret, Anne, and dozens of neighborhood children, including Lucy, all wearing small blue ribbons in solidarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Harrison, his voice echoing through the sound system. "Tonight, I am pleased to present a very special composition, the Twilight Symphony, a piece that will mark the beginning of a new era for our company and for this neighborhood." James walked to the piano, his steps echoing in the expectant silence. Before sitting down, he took out an old photograph, Eleanor at the piano, teaching a young Anne. He placed it on the piano where everyone could see. His hands touched the first notes, but they were not from Harrison's official score. It was Eleanor's original version with all its nuances and secrets. The melody flowed through the ballroom like a confession, each note carrying a truth long silenced. Harrison's eyes widened in recognition. He began to move toward the piano, but Anne stood up, holding documents in her hands. Margaret did the same, and one by one, others from the community rose, each carrying a different piece of evidence of the truth. "This music," James spoke, continuing to play, his voice amplified by the piano's microphone, "was composed by Eleanor Thompson. Just like all the others you claim as your own, William. Every note, every harmony, was born from her heart." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Harrison tried to intervene, but it was too late. The neighborhood children, led by Lucy, began to sing A. The melody intertwined perfectly with the piano, the same one they had practiced in the garden, now revealing its true strength. "Eleanor didn't just sell her music," James continued, his hands dancing over the keys. "She sacrificed her recognition to protect a bigger dream, a place where music could transform lives, regardless of social class or purchasing power." The evidence circulated throughout the ballroom, letters, contracts, Eleanor's diary. The truth, like a symphony long contained, finally found its voice. Harrison, cornered, watched as his empire of lies crumbled to the sound of the music that was never truly his. The last notes of the Twilight Symphony still hung in the air when silence descended upon the ballroom like a delicate veil. James kept his hands on the keys, feeling the echo of Eleanor's melodies vibrating through the grand piano. On the face of everyone present, the impact of the truth finally revealed could be seen. William Harrison, his mask of arrogance completely shattered, remained motionless at the center of the ballroom. The luxurious book of his compositions lay forgotten on a nearby table, its pages now carrying the weight of an exposed lie. "Mr. Harrison," Lucy's voice cut through the silence as she stood up from her seat in the last row. "Mrs. Eleanor taught me something through Mr. Thompson, even though I never met her. She used to say that true music doesn't need a famous name, it just needs to touch people's hearts." Her simple words caused a wave of movement throughout the ballroom. One by one the guests began to rise. It wasn't just the neighborhood children and their families, it was music critics, renowned artists, people who finally recognized the true voice behind the melodies they had admired so much. And approached the piano carrying an old folder. "These are all Eleanor's original compositions," she announced, her voice firm. "And here's something else. Letters from other composers who were also silenced. Tonight is not just about Eleanor, it's about restoring the truth to music." James watched as the truth spread like a contagious melody. Harrison, confronted with irrefutable evidence and the testimony of dozens of people, could no longer maintain his facade. His empire, built on stolen notes and silenced dreams, began to crumble. But this was not a story of revenge, it was a story of redemption. "William," James stood up from the piano, walking toward the defeated man. Eleanor never wanted to destroy anything. She wanted to build something greater, a place where music could be free, where talents could blossom regardless of social status. It's not too late to transform this company into something that truly honors music and its creators. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was profound. The Harrison Music Corporation, under new leadership and the supervision of a board that included members from the community, established a fund to support young musicians. James's studio was not only preserved, it became the first of a network of music schools accessible to all. On a golden autumn afternoon, James sat again at the studio piano. Lucy was beside him, her small hands now more confident on the keys. On the wall, a new photograph joined the portrait of Eleanor. It showed all the neighborhood children during their performance at the ball, their faces lit by the joy of true music. "You know, Lucy," James said, adjusting the blue bow tie he now wore at every lesson, "Eleanor used to say that every musical note is like a little truth waiting to be discovered. And when we put all those truths together, they become love," Lucy finished, beginning to play the first chords of the Twilight Symphony. Like her music did. James smiled, his hands joining hers on the piano. The melody flowed through the studio, stronger and truer than ever. In the portrait on the wall, Eleanor seemed to smile, knowing that her music had finally found its true home, in the hearts of all those who believed in the transformative power of an honest melody. The truth, like music, had found its way. And in the notes dancing through the air, Eleanor's legacy lived on, touching hearts and transforming lives, one melody at a time. A special message for you who followed this story until the end. If this narrative touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is music to our ears. And if you want more emotional stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the Soul and History channel and activate the notification bell. Together we can continue exploring the melodies that make life worth living. Until the next story.